At my ex-husband's engagement gala, his business partner loudly announced, Marcus finally traded up from his ancient wife to someone who can keep up with success. The room erupted in cruel laughter as I stood there, 42 and devastated. But as I walked past their table, I whispered to Marcus, I hope you're ready to lose everything you built.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
The champagne glass trembled in my hand as I stared across the glittering ballroom of the Venetian Grand Hotel. 6 months had passed since that humiliating night, and here I was again, but everything had changed. There, just 50 feet away, stood my ex-husband Marcus, with his 26-year-old fiancée Amber draped on his arm like an expensive accessory. Her laugh was too loud, too desperate, as she clung to the man who'd thrown away 15 years of marriage for someone age-appropriate. But it wasn't their presence that made my heart race. It was the moment Marcus's eyes met mine, and his face went white as marble. Because standing beside me, his hand resting protectively on my back, was Alexander Black, the tech billionaire whose empire had just acquired Marcus's struggling real estate firm for pennies on the dollar. Diana, Alexander murmured, his voice carrying that distinctive confidence that had first caught my attention 3 months ago. Shall we go say hello to your former husband? I smoothed my emerald silk dress, custom Valentino, because Alexander had insisted I deserved the best, and felt a smile curve my lips. The same woman Marcus had called over the hill and past her prime was now the most envied person in the room. Let me tell you how I got here. 15 years earlier, I was Diana Ackles, a promising biotech researcher fresh out of Stanford with a PhD in molecular biology. At 27, I was already making breakthroughs in age reversal research that had pharmaceutical companies fighting for my attention. My laboratory at Morrison Biotech was my sanctuary, where I spent 18-hour days developing compounds that could slow cellular aging. Marcus Sterling was the ambitious real estate developer who swept me off my feet with grand romantic gestures and bigger dreams. He owned 3 properties in downtown San Francisco and had plans to build an empire. We met at a charity fundraiser where his real estate company was sponsoring a table, and I was presenting my research on longevity sciences. You're literally working on the fountain of youth, he'd said, cornering me by the bar after my presentation. That's incredible. I'm building the future too, just with concrete and steel instead of molecules. His confidence was magnetic. Marcus had this way of making everything feel possible, like together we could conquer any challenge. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. Within a year, I was wearing his grandmother's engagement ring and planning a wedding that would merge our 2 ambitious worlds. We'll be the power couple of San Francisco, he promised, the night he proposed. Your brilliant mind and my business instincts. Nothing can stop us. I believed him completely. What Marcus never bothered to understand, what he dismissed as playing with test tubes, was that my research had been quietly revolutionizing the biotech industry for over a decade. While he was building condominiums, I was building the future of human longevity. My breakthrough came 3 years into our marriage when I discovered a novel protein compound that could slow cellular aging by 30% in laboratory trials. The research took 4 years to perfect, working nights and weekends in my lab while Marcus attended networking events and golf tournaments with clients. Still playing scientist, he'd joke when I'd come home after midnight, my hands stained with chemical markers and my mind buzzing with possibilities. The morning Morrison Biotech's stock price jumped 47% after announcing my compound's successful Phase 2 trials, I brought the newspaper to Marcus over breakfast. The headline read, Stanford researchers' longevity breakthrough could add decades to human lifespan. Look, I said, setting the paper beside his coffee, the trials worked. We're moving to Phase 3 next month. Marcus glanced at the article for exactly 3 seconds before returning to his real estate portfolio. That's nice, honey. Did you see that the Marin project got final approval? We're breaking ground next week. 3 pharmaceutical companies bid for licensing rights to my compound. The eventual deal with Vitagen Pharmaceuticals was worth $68 million over 7 years, with Morrison Biotech receiving the largest research licensing fee in company history. My name was listed as primary inventor on 14 patents related to cellular regeneration therapy. I was featured on the cover of Scientific American. Harvard offered me a department chair position. The MacArthur Foundation called to discuss their Genius Grant program. Marcus's response to each achievement was the same polite disinterest he'd show for a neighbor's vacation photos. Dr. Ackles is changing how we think about aging itself, the Scientific American interviewer had said during our photo shoot. Her work could theoretically extend healthy human lifespan to 120 years or more. That evening, I showed Marcus the magazine with my face on the cover. He was reviewing blueprints for another luxury development, red pen in hand. "The photographer made you look tired," he said without looking up. "You should wear more makeup for these things." The compound that Marcus called my chemistry hobby had generated over $200 million in revenue from Morrison Biotech by the time I turned 38. My research team had expanded to 23 scientists working under my direction. Universities across the country were incorporating my methodologies into their graduate programs. But at home, I was just Marcus's wife who spent too much time at work. The final insult came when Fortune magazine named me one of their 40 under 40 innovators. The article described my cellular regeneration research as the most significant breakthrough in longevity science since the discovery of DNA. Marcus found the magazine on our coffee table and flipped to my feature. 40 under 40, he said, shaking his head. "You barely made the cut. Amber would have been on this list at 26 if she'd gone into science instead of marketing." The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. I was literally developing technology to extend human youth and vitality, while my husband was discarding me for being too old. Before I became a woman Marcus wanted to replace, I was the brilliant scientist he couldn't resist pursuing. Our meet-cute happened at the Innovation Summit in 2009, San Francisco's annual gathering where tech entrepreneurs, researchers, and investors mingled over cocktails and grand promises about changing the world. I was 27, presenting preliminary findings about cellular regeneration to a room full of venture capitalists who saw dollar signs in every breakthrough. Marcus was 32, already successful enough to attend as a sponsor rather than someone seeking funding. Sterling Real Estate had just completed the Embarcadero luxury towers, and he was riding high on a wave of commercial success that made him magnetic in any room. After my presentation, he approached with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Dr. Ackles," he said, offering his hand with a smile that was practiced but somehow still genuine. "Marcus Sterling, I have to admit I understood maybe 20% of what you just explained, but I understood enough to know you're going to be very famous someday." I laughed, caught off guard by his honesty. Most people pretend they followed everything perfectly. I'm not most people. I'm the guy who builds places for brilliant scientists to live after they revolutionize the world. He gestured toward the panoramic view of San Francisco Bay visible through the conference center's floor-to-ceiling windows. See that skyline? Half those buildings exist because someone had a breakthrough idea in a laboratory. "Let me buy you dinner," he said as the conference wound down, "somewhere expensive enough to match your future Nobel Prize acceptance speech." That dinner lasted until 3 in the morning. We talked about everything: his childhood in Oregon, where his father built custom homes, my parents' journey from Taiwan to California so I could have educational opportunities they'd never imagined. Marcus described his vision for developing San Francisco's waterfront, while I explained how cellular regeneration could theoretically extend human lifespan indefinitely. "You're building the future of where people live," I told him over our second bottle of wine. "I'm building the future of how long they'll live there." "Perfect partnership," he said, raising his glass. "Here's to building the impossible." Within 3 months, Marcus was driving down from the city every weekend to visit me in my Palo Alto apartment. He'd arrive Friday evenings with takeout from expensive restaurants and listen with genuine fascination as I described protein folding patterns and cellular mitosis cycles. Marcus made me feel like my work mattered to someone outside the academic bubble. When I published papers, he'd frame the title pages and hang them in his office.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
When experiments failed, he'd bring ice cream and remind me that every great discovery required countless setbacks. The proposal came 18 months later, during a weekend trip to Napa Valley. Marcus had planned everything meticulously. Dinner at Auberge du Soleil, champagne that cost more than my monthly rent, a view of rolling vineyards that looked like something from a fairy tale. "Diana," he said, dropping to one knee beside our table as the sun set behind distant mountains, "you're going to change the world. I want to be standing beside you when you do." I said yes because I thought he loved me for exactly who I was, not despite it. The first 5 years of our marriage felt like living inside a dream we'd architected together. Marcus and I moved through San Francisco's elite circles as the power couple we'd promised to become, the visionary scientist and the ambitious developer, each amplifying the other's success in ways that felt magical rather than calculated. When Morrison Biotech needed additional laboratory space for my expanding research team, Marcus didn't just help me find suitable real estate, he designed a custom biotech facility from the ground up. The Sterling Laboratory Building became a model for research facilities throughout the Bay Area, with clean rooms that met the highest pharmaceutical standards and office spaces that felt more like Google's campus than traditional sterile lab environments. "Every great scientist deserves a workspace that matches their vision," Marcus said during the building's dedication ceremony. He stood beside me as we cut the ribbon, his arm around my waist, his pride genuine and infectious. "Diana's going to cure aging in this building. I just provided the foundation." When my cellular regeneration research required expensive equipment that Morrison Biotech couldn't afford, Marcus liquidated 2 of his commercial properties to help fund the purchases. The electron microscope alone cost $400,000, but he never hesitated. "It's an investment in both our futures," he said, signing the check without reading the fine print. "Your breakthrough is going to change everything, Diana." I reciprocated his support with equal enthusiasm. When Marcus pitched his most ambitious project, a 40-story luxury tower on the Embarcadero, I used my scientific credentials to help him secure environmental impact approvals. My published research on sustainable building materials convinced city planners that Sterling Real Estate was committed to environmental responsibility. Our social calendar became a carefully orchestrated dance between scientific conferences and real estate industry events. Marcus would attend my presentations at biotechnology symposiums, asking thoughtful questions during Q&A sessions, and networking with pharmaceutical executives who might fund future research. I would accompany him to real estate galas, using my Stanford connections to introduce him to venture capitalists and tech entrepreneurs looking for commercial development partners. "You're my secret weapon," he'd whisper during cocktail receptions as another tech CEO approached our table. "They take me seriously because you're brilliant. Your reputation opens doors I could never reach alone." The success was intoxicating. Marcus's real estate empire expanded from 3 properties to 15 major developments across Northern California. My research team grew from 5 scientists to 23, with NIH grants totaling over $12 million. Together, we were featured on the cover of San Francisco Magazine as the couple reshaping the Bay Area's future. We bought the Pacific Heights mansion during our 3rd year of marriage, a Victorian masterpiece that we renovated with the same collaborative spirit that defined everything else. Marcus designed the floor plan, while I researched historical paint formulations to restore original colors. "This house represents everything we've built together," Marcus said the night we moved in, pouring champagne in our new kitchen. "Your brilliant mind, my business instincts, and a shared vision that's bigger than either of us could achieve alone." During those golden years, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. But even then, there were small signs I should have noticed, signs that Marcus's comfort with my success had limits. The opportunity that would begin unraveling everything came disguised as Marcus's greatest triumph. Blackstone Development, the largest commercial real estate firm on the West Coast, offered him a partnership that would triple his net worth and establish Sterling Real Estate as a major player in California's luxury market. There was one condition: we had to relocate to Los Angeles within 6 months. Diana, this is it, Marcus said, pacing our living room with an energy I hadn't seen since our early dating days. Blackstone wants me to head their Northern California expansion. We're talking about developing the entire waterfront district from Marin to Monterey. Billion-dollar projects, baby. I looked up from the research proposal I'd been reviewing, a collaboration with Harvard Medical School that would expand my cellular regeneration trials to human subjects. The document represented 3 years of careful preparation and could lead to the first FDA-approved anti-aging therapy in human history. Los Angeles? I repeated, my stomach already sinking. Marcus, my entire research infrastructure is here. Morrison Biotech, my laboratory team, the university partnerships. I can't just pack up 15 years of scientific relationships and start over. He stopped pacing and sat beside me, taking my hands with careful attention. I know it's a big change, he said, his voice gentle but determined. But think about what this means for us. The partnership income alone would fund your research for the next decade. You wouldn't need to worry about grant applications or budget restrictions. But my team here could visit as consultants. Diana, you're brilliant enough to rebuild anywhere. Your reputation precedes you. Any research institution in Los Angeles would be honored to have Dr. Diana Ackles. The flattery felt calculated, designed to smooth over the massive disruption he was asking me to accept. Moving would mean abandoning relationships that had taken years to cultivate. What about the Harvard collaboration? I asked, holding up the proposal. This could lead to human trials within 2 years. Marcus glanced at the document like it was a minor inconvenience rather than the culmination of my life's work. You can collaborate remotely, he said. Diana, we're living in the digital age. Physical location matters less than it used to. But physical location mattered enormously in biomedical research. Laboratory work required hands-on experimentation. Clinical trials needed face-to-face patient interaction. And if I say no? I asked quietly. Marcus's expression shifted, revealing something harder beneath his usual charm. Then I take the partnership alone, he said. Diana, I love you, but I'm not going to let your attachment to a specific laboratory hold back both our futures. The decision was made for me when Morrison Biotech's CEO called with devastating news. Without my leadership, the company couldn't maintain the federal grants that funded my research. My team would be disbanded, my laboratory would be converted to general office space. That evening, I found Marcus celebrating with expensive scotch and congratulatory phone calls. I'll do it, I said when he finished his latest call. I'll move to Los Angeles. His smile was triumphant rather than sympathetic. I had no idea I'd just taken the first step toward becoming invisible in my own marriage. Los Angeles was supposed to be our fresh start, but it became the beginning of my professional extinction. Marcus threw himself into the Blackstone partnership with obsessive intensity, working 16-hour days and networking at every exclusive event from Beverly Hills to Manhattan Beach. Meanwhile, I struggled to rebuild a research career that had been world-class in San Francisco, but felt amateur in a city where I had no connections, no credibility, and no laboratory infrastructure. The apartment Marcus chose was stunning, a penthouse in Century City with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire Los Angeles basin. But it came with rent that consumed 60% of our monthly income, leaving little budget for the expensive equipment and specialized materials my research required. We need to maintain appearances, Marcus explained when I questioned the extravagant housing cost. In real estate, perception is everything. Blackstone's partners don't live in modest apartments. I converted the smaller bedroom into a makeshift home laboratory, but it was a shadow of the sophisticated facility I'd left behind. My electron microscope was in storage because the apartment couldn't support its electrical requirements. My cell cultivation equipment was reduced to basic instruments that belonged in an undergraduate laboratory. Marcus's conversations about my work began shifting in ways that felt subtle but systematically diminishing. At Blackstone networking events, when colleagues asked about his wife's career, Marcus's introductions became increasingly vague. Diana's a scientist, he'd say, with a smile that suggested he was being modest about something impressive. She works in biotechnology research, very specialized stuff that's over my head. The phrase over my head was strategic, designed to make his lack of specific knowledge sound like my work was too complex for normal people to understand, rather than acknowledging that I was a recognized expert with 15 years of published research. When I tried to correct these introductions, Marcus would interrupt with gentle redirections. "Diana's being modest," he'd say, placing his hand on my back in a gesture that looked supportive but felt controlling. "She's always been more interested in the science than the recognition." The erosion accelerated when I applied for research positions at Los Angeles institutions. UCLA's biomedical engineering department offered me a junior research associate position, a title I'd held 15 years earlier, fresh out of graduate school. The salary was 40% less than my Morrison Biotech compensation, with no laboratory autonomy and no guarantee of research funding. "It's a foot in the door," Marcus said when I expressed frustration about the significant step backward. "You can rebuild your reputation once you're established in the LA research community." The final insult came during a dinner party at a Blackstone Partners Malibu estate. When Mrs. Patricia Whitmore asked about my background, I started explaining my cellular regeneration research. Before I could respond meaningfully, Marcus appeared beside our table. "Diana's always been the brains of the family," he said, with the indulgent tone someone might use to describe a precocious child. "I handle the business side of things. She handles the science side. Perfect division of labor." My groundbreaking research had been reduced to household task allocation. I was beginning to believe Marcus's version of my story. Everything changed the day Marcus hired Amber Sinclair as Sterling Real Estate's new marketing director. She walked into our lives with the confidence of someone who had never been told she was too anything, too old, too ambitious, too opinionated. At 26, Amber possessed the kind of effortless beauty that seemed designed specifically to make women over 40 question their relevance. Marcus announced her hiring during dinner at Nobu Malibu, where we'd gone to celebrate his latest Blackstone project approval. "I found the perfect person to handle our marketing strategy," he said, cutting into his black cod with the satisfaction of someone who'd solved a complicated problem. "Amber Sinclair, fresh from UCLA's MBA program. She specialized in luxury brand positioning and has incredible ideas about targeting younger demographics." I looked up from my untouched sashimi, immediately alert to the enthusiasm in his voice. Marcus had a particular tone he used when discussing things that excited him professionally. Animated, energetic, slightly louder than normal conversation. It was the same tone he'd once used to describe my research breakthroughs. "Why do you need to target younger demographics?" I asked. "Your clients are established investors and developers. Most of them are over 50. "That's exactly the problem," Marcus said, leaning forward with intensity. "We're thinking too traditionally. The next generation of wealth is coming from tech entrepreneurs and cryptocurrency investors, people in their 30s and 40s who made fortunes in industries that didn't exist 20 years ago." He pulled out his phone and showed me Amber's LinkedIn profile. The photograph displayed a woman with perfectly straight blonde hair, flawless skin, and a smile that suggested she'd never experienced professional disappointment. "She understands how to reach decision-makers who get their information from social media and digital platforms," Marcus continued. "Traditional marketing approaches don't work with this demographic. We need someone who speaks their language." Someone who speaks their language. The implication was clear. Marcus needed someone young enough to understand contemporary communication methods that were apparently beyond my comprehension. The following week, Marcus's conversations became dominated by Amber's observations and suggestions. Every evening brought new stories about her innovative thinking and fresh perspectives. "Amber had this brilliant insight about the Marina Del Rey project," he'd say, loosening his tie after another 14-hour workday. "She suggested we market the luxury amenities as lifestyle experiences rather than building features." That sounds like standard real estate marketing. Selling lifestyle over square footage has been common practice for decades. Marcus's expression shifted slightly, the way it did when I questioned something he was enthusiastic about. "Diana, there's a difference between knowing a concept and understanding how to implement it effectively with contemporary buyers," he said with patient condescension. Amber's generation intuitively understands how modern consumers make purchasing decisions. Amber's generation, at 39, I was apparently too far removed from contemporary consumer behavior to offer relevant insights. The first photograph appeared on Marcus's Instagram account 2 weeks later. Amber standing beside him at a construction site, both wearing hard hats, reviewing architectural plans. Her smile was professional but warm, and Marcus's expression seemed more genuine than it had been in our recent conversations. The woman who would systematically destroy my marriage had arrived. Amber's strategy for replacing me in Marcus's life was so subtle and systematic that I almost admired its psychological sophistication. She never directly criticized me or suggested that Marcus's marriage was problematic. Instead, she positioned herself as everything I wasn't: young, energetic, contemporary, and completely focused on advancing Marcus's career without any competing professional interests. The campaign began with seemingly innocent questions about my background during the few occasions when our paths crossed at Sterling Real Estate's office. I'd stopped by to have lunch with Marcus one afternoon and found Amber organizing client files in the reception area. "Diana," she said with enthusiasm that felt genuine but somehow calculated, "Marcus talks about you constantly. You're the scientist, right? That must be so interesting. I've always wondered what it would be like to work in research." Her tone suggested that scientific research was a fascinating hobby rather than a serious profession. "I specialize in cellular regeneration," I said, settling into the conversation despite my instincts, essentially studying how to slow or reverse aging at the molecular level. "Wow," Amber said, her eyes widening with what looked like genuine curiosity. "So you're trying to help people stay young forever? That's like something from a science fiction movie." Science fiction movie? My 15 years of peer-reviewed research had been reduced to fantasy entertainment. "Actually," Amber interjected with perfect timing during our lunch, "I was just telling Marcus how lucky he is to have someone who understands the importance of his career. So many spouses get jealous of the long hours that success requires." The comment was delivered as a compliment, but it carried multiple implications. First, that Marcus's career was more important than mine. Second, that I was expected to be understanding about his time commitments. Third, that jealousy would be inappropriate. The psychological campaign intensified over the following weeks. Amber began sending Marcus articles about successful business partnerships between older, experienced executives and younger, innovative team members. The content always emphasized how generational diversity strengthened companies. "Look at this Harvard Business Review piece Amber sent me," Marcus said one evening, showing me an article titled "The Power of Cross-Generational Mentorship in Business." It talks about how the most successful companies pair seasoned executives with emerging talent. Her social media presence became increasingly intertwined with Sterling Real Estate's brand. Her Instagram account featured professional photographs from company events, construction sites, and client meetings. The captions were masterfully crafted to suggest professional dedication while hinting at personal admiration. "Grateful to learn from one of LA's most visionary developers," she wrote, beneath a photo of herself and Marcus at a groundbreaking ceremony. "True leadership means seeing possibilities where others see problems." Marcus began sharing Amber's posts on his own social media accounts, adding comments that revealed more enthusiasm than he'd shown for anything in months. Meanwhile, my own presence in Marcus's social media disappeared entirely. The most insidious part of Amber's strategy was how she positioned herself as Marcus's protector against my apparent lack of understanding about his professional pressures. When I questioned his increasingly late work hours, Marcus would respond with defenses that sounded like they came from business self-help books. "Amber helps me understand how much stress I've been putting on our relationship," he'd say. She pointed out that successful partnerships require space for professional growth. Amber had successfully convinced my husband that she was helping him build a stronger, more successful life. The moment that shattered my remaining illusions about Marcus's respect for me happened at the Blackstone Annual Investor Gala, held at the Beverly Hills Hotel's Crystal Ballroom. I'd spent weeks preparing for the event, researching every major client and potential investor who would be attending. This was my chance to prove that I could be an asset to Marcus's career rather than an irrelevant appendage. I wore a midnight blue Diane von Furstenberg dress and had my hair and makeup professionally done. Looking in the mirror before we left, I saw a woman who belonged in rooms where million-dollar deals were discussed. After my presentation, he approached with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Dr. Ackles," he said, offering his hand with a smile that was practiced but somehow still genuine, "Marcus Sterling. I have to admit, I understood maybe 20% of what you just explained, but I understood enough to know you're going to be very famous someday." I laughed, caught off guard by his honesty. Most people pretend they followed everything perfectly. I'm not most people. I'm the guy who builds places for brilliant scientists to live after they revolutionize the world. He gestured toward the panoramic view of San Francisco Bay, visible through the conference center's floor-to-ceiling windows. See that skyline? Half those buildings exist because someone had a breakthrough idea in a laboratory. "Let me buy you dinner," he said as the conference wound down, "somewhere expensive enough to match your future Nobel Prize acceptance speech." That dinner lasted until 3 in the morning. We talked about everything: his childhood in Oregon, where his father built custom homes, my parents' journey from Taiwan to California so I could have educational opportunities they'd never imagined. Marcus described his vision for developing San Francisco's waterfront, while I explained how cellular regeneration could theoretically extend human lifespan indefinitely. "You're building the future of where people live," I told him over our second bottle of wine. "I'm building the future of how long they'll live there." "Perfect partnership," he said, raising his glass. "Here's to building the impossible." Within 3 months, Marcus was driving down from the city every weekend to visit me in my Palo Alto apartment. He'd arrive Friday evenings with takeout from expensive restaurants and listen with genuine fascination as I described protein folding patterns and cellular mitosis cycles. Marcus made me feel like my work mattered to someone outside the academic bubble. When I published papers, he'd frame the title pages and hang them in his office. When experiments failed, he'd bring ice cream and remind me that every great discovery required countless setbacks. Marcus immediately began working the room with practiced efficiency, introducing me to clients and colleagues with perfunctory politeness. "This is my wife, Diana," he'd say, his hand resting briefly on my back. "Diana, this is Robert Chen from Pacific Development Group." The introductions were generic, revealing nothing about my background or expertise. I was simply Marcus's wife, present because spouses were expected, but not particularly relevant to substantial conversations. I tried to engage meaningfully with the people we met, using my research about their companies to contribute insights that demonstrated my understanding of real estate development and investment strategies. "Your West Side project is fascinating," I told Margaret Lawson, whose firm was developing sustainable housing complexes. "The integration of solar technology requires sophisticated engineering. I've done research on energy-efficient building materials that might interest your technical team." Margaret's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "What kind of research? Are you in the construction industry?" Before I could explain my scientific background, Marcus interrupted with a laugh that sounded apologetic. "Diana reads a lot about sustainable technology," he said, his tone suggesting that my knowledge came from casual interest rather than professional expertise. "She's always been curious about environmental issues." "Actually," I began, trying to reclaim the conversation, "I have a PhD in molecular biology with specialized research in material sciences." "Honey," Marcus interrupted again, his smile bright but his eyes warning, "I don't think Margaret wants a technical lecture at a social event." The dismissal was devastating in its casualness. Marcus had just told a room full of successful professionals that his wife's expertise wasn't worth their time. The killing blow came during dinner when the conversation turned to biotechnology investments. Dr. Patricia Morse, whose venture capital firm specialized in biotech, was discussing longevity research. "The current research is incredibly promising," I said, leaning forward with enthusiasm. "Cellular regeneration therapy could realistically extend healthy human lifespan by 30 to 50 years within the next 2 decades." Diana, Marcus interrupted with a laugh that made my expertise sound like cocktail party trivia, you're getting a little carried away. Dr. Morse is an actual investor in biotechnology companies. She understands the real business applications better than people who just read articles about scientific research. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus had just told a table full of investors that his wife's opinions about biotechnology weren't worth taking seriously. I sat in stunned silence for the rest of dinner, watching Marcus systematically ensure that my voice remained marginalized. Standing in the parking lot afterward, I realized that Marcus Sterling no longer saw Diana Ackles as someone worthy of respect. I was a liability to be managed, not a partner to be valued. The conversation that shattered my world happened 3 weeks after the Blackstone Gala, and I heard it completely by accident. I'd returned home early from a failed job interview at Cedars-Sinai and was heading to the kitchen when I heard Marcus's voice coming from his home office. He was on a conference call, but the door was cracked open and his voice carried clearly. The transition needs to be handled delicately, Marcus was saying, his tone carrying strategic focus. Diana's not going to make this easy, but she's becoming a liability that we can't afford to ignore anymore. I froze in our hallway, my heart racing. Transition? Liability? I understand your concerns, came a woman's voice through the speaker, Amber's voice, though she sounded more professional and calculating than the enthusiastic marketing director I'd met. But you need to think about this systematically. Diana represents everything that's wrong with your current image. She's older, she's stuck in academic thinking, and she doesn't understand contemporary business culture. My hands began trembling as I realized I was listening to Marcus and Amber discussing me like I was a business problem requiring strategic solutions. The age issue is becoming more obvious, Marcus replied, and I could hear him pacing. At networking events, people notice the difference. When I'm trying to position Sterling Real Estate as innovative and forward-thinking, having a wife who's approaching middle age sends the wrong message. Approaching middle age? I was 39 years old, at the peak of my intellectual capabilities, and my husband was discussing my age like it was a professional embarrassment.
Exactly, Amber said, her voice gaining confidence. And it's not just the age thing, Marcus. Diana's whole personality is wrong for where you're trying to go. She's too serious, too intellectual, too focused on things that don't matter to your clients. You need someone who understands lifestyle marketing, contemporary culture, social media influence. The divorce will actually strengthen your professional brand, she continued, and the word divorce hit me like a physical blow. Single, successful executive is better than married to someone who doesn't fit your trajectory. But honestly, the ideal situation would be finding the right partner, someone who enhances your reputation instead of limiting it. The right partner. They weren't just discussing my inadequacies, they were planning my replacement. Diana's going to fight this, Marcus said, his voice carrying concern about logistics rather than emotional devastation. She'll want to take half of everything. The timing is crucial because Sterling Real Estate's valuation is about to increase significantly. That's why you need documentation showing that her contributions to your success have been minimal, Amber replied, and I could hear papers rustling. I've been researching California divorce law. If you can demonstrate that your business growth happened independently of her support, you can limit her financial claims. Minimal contributions. 15 years of supporting Marcus's career, moving across the country for his opportunities, sacrificing my own professional advancement. All of it was being reframed as minimal to justify reducing my divorce settlement. As their conversation ended, I managed to move silently to our bedroom. I sat on our bed, staring at my hands and trying to process what I'd just learned. Marcus Sterling and Amber Sinclair had been planning my replacement for months. But as I sat, surrounded by 15 years of shared memories and broken promises, something crystallized inside me. The woman they were planning to discard had capabilities they'd never bothered to understand. 2 months after discovering Marcus and Amber's betrayal plan, I'd been living in a state of careful preparation, documenting everything while pretending ignorance about their scheme.
I'd consulted with divorce attorneys, quietly transferred money to accounts Marcus couldn't access, and begun rebuilding professional relationships I'd neglected. But I wasn't prepared for the invitation that arrived on a Tuesday morning in November. "Diana," Marcus called from the kitchen, his voice carrying unusual excitement. "You need to see this." I found him holding an elegant, cream-colored invitation with gold embossing. His smile was broader than I'd seen in months. "Blackstone's Winter Gala," he said, practically vibrating with enthusiasm. "It's their most exclusive event of the year. Only senior partners and their most important clients are invited. This is huge, Diana. This means they're seriously considering me for the executive partnership track." I took the invitation and read the elegant script. "Blackstone Development cordially invites Marcus Sterling and guest to the annual Winter Investment Gala, December 15th, Venetian Grand Hotel, Beverly Hills." "Congratulations," I said, keeping my voice neutral despite the sick feeling in my stomach. "This must be what you've been working toward." "It is," Marcus said, reading the invitation again like he couldn't quite believe it was real. "Patricia Whitemore told me they were impressed with the Marina del Rey project, but I didn't expect this level of recognition so quickly." He was pacing now, the way he did when planning major strategies. "This gala isn't just a social event," he continued. "It's where Blackstone announces their annual partnerships and major expansion plans. If they're inviting me, it means I'm being considered for opportunities I hadn't even imagined." "What about Amber?" I asked, testing his reaction. "Will she be attending as part of the Sterling real estate team?" Marcus's expression shifted slightly, a micro-expression of discomfort that someone less observant might have missed. "Amber will be there representing our marketing initiatives," he said carefully. "Blackstone wants to see the full Sterling real estate leadership team." Full leadership team. Amber had been elevated to leadership status while I remained simply Marcus's guest. Over the following weeks, Marcus's preparation for the gala consumed his attention completely. He bought a new tuxedo, had his hair cut by an expensive stylist, and spent hours rehearsing conversations with potential investors. "This could change everything for us," he said one evening, trying on his new tuxedo. "If Blackstone offers me the executive partnership, we'll have access to development projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars." Us. Everything. Marcus still used language that suggested we were building a shared future, apparently unaware that I knew about his plans to divorce me once the partnership was secured. "You'll need to be at your absolute best," he continued. "These people will be evaluating every aspect of my life, including my personal relationships. First impressions matter enormously." Marcus was positioning my behavior as crucial to his professional success, creating pressure for me to be the perfect supportive spouse, even as he planned to replace me. As December 15th approached, I finalized my own preparations for the evening that would change everything. Marcus thought he was attending a celebration of his professional triumph. Amber thought she was positioning herself to become the next Mrs. Sterling. But Diana Ackles had spent 3 months preparing for something entirely different. The Blackstone Winter Gala would indeed change everything, just not in the way Marcus and Amber were expecting. The morning of the Blackstone Gala, I woke up before dawn and lay in bed next to Marcus, watching him sleep peacefully while planning the destruction of everything he thought he'd built. His face looked younger in the early light, filtering through our bedroom curtains, reminding me of the ambitious graduate student I'd fallen in love with so many years ago. For a moment, I felt something that might have been regret. Then I remembered his voice on that conference call, discussing my age and usefulness like I was a business asset that had depreciated beyond acceptable limits. I slipped out of bed quietly and made coffee in our kitchen, standing at the window overlooking Los Angeles as the city slowly awakened. In 12 hours, Marcus would learn that the woman he'd dismissed as an aging academic had capabilities he'd never bothered to understand. The day passed with surreal normalcy. Marcus spent the afternoon at Sterling Real Estate's office, coordinating final preparations for what he believed would be the most important evening of his career. I used the time to make final preparations of my own, including a phone call that would reshape both our futures. "Ms. Ackles," came the familiar voice when my call connected, "I've been expecting to hear from you." Alexander Black, founder and CEO of Black Industries, had been trying to recruit me for 3 months. His company's biotechnology division was developing revolutionary anti-aging therapies, and he'd heard about my cellular regeneration research through industry contacts who'd known my work at Morrison Biotech. "Mr. Black," I said, settling into the conversation that would change everything, "I'm ready to discuss your offer." "Excellent," Alexander replied, his voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "My lawyers have prepared the partnership agreement we discussed. Chief Scientific Officer, 40% equity stake, unlimited research budget, and complete autonomy over your laboratory operations." 40% equity stake? Alexander was offering me ownership in a company that would be valued at over $2 billion within 5 years. "There's one condition," I said, looking out our apartment window at the city where Marcus thought he was building his empire. "I need the announcement to be made tonight at the Blackstone Winter Gala." Alexander's laugh was delighted rather than surprised. "Diana, I've been in business for 30 years, and I've never met anyone who understands strategic timing better than you do. Consider it done." After hanging up, I spent 2 hours getting ready with the meticulous attention I'd once reserved for major scientific presentations. The emerald green silk gown fit perfectly, elegant enough for Beverly Hills society, but memorable enough to ensure that everyone at the gala would remember this evening. The jewelry was understated but expensive: diamond earrings and my grandmother's pearl necklace, pieces that suggested old money rather than new wealth. Looking in our bedroom mirror, I saw a woman who belonged in rooms where billion-dollar decisions were made. Marcus had spent months convincing me that I was too old, too academic, too irrelevant for his contemporary business world. But the reflection staring back at me was someone who commanded respect rather than tolerance. Marcus returned home at 6 o'clock, already wearing his new tuxedo and radiating the nervous energy of someone preparing for a performance that could determine his entire future. "You look incredible," he said when he saw me, and for a moment his appreciation seemed genuine rather than calculated. "Diana, I know I haven't been the most attentive husband lately, but tonight feels like a new beginning for us." A new beginning? Marcus had no idea how accurate that statement would prove to be.
"I want you to know," he continued, straightening his bow tie while watching my reflection in our hallway mirror, "how much I appreciate your patience with my work schedule. Building something extraordinary requires sacrifices, and you've supported me through everything." Supported him through everything, including his systematic plan to replace me with his marketing director. "Tonight is our night," Marcus said, offering me his arm as we prepared to leave. "After Blackstone offers me the executive partnership, we'll have the financial security to build the life we've always dreamed about. Our night, our life." Marcus genuinely believed that I was unaware of his plans to build that life with Amber. The drive to the Venetian Grand Hotel felt like traveling toward destiny rather than a social event. Marcus spent the 20 minutes reviewing his talking points for conversations with Blackstone's board members, while I sat quietly beside him, thinking about the scientific breakthroughs that had brought Alexander Black to my attention. "Remember," Marcus said as we pulled into the hotel's circular driveway, "tonight is about relationship building, not academic discussions. These people respect practical business applications, not theoretical research." Practical business applications. Marcus was still convinced that my expertise was too abstract for serious business conversations. The Venetian Grand Hotel's ballroom was even more spectacular than I'd expected. Crystal chandeliers casting golden light over tables draped in ivory silk, each place setting worth more than most people's monthly rent. The guest list represented the pinnacle of Los Angeles business elite: real estate moguls, technology entrepreneurs, pharmaceutical executives, and venture capitalists whose decisions shaped entire industries. As we entered the ballroom, I spotted Amber immediately. She was wearing a red dress that was just slightly too tight and too attention-grabbing for a business event,
but she moved through the crowd with confidence that suggested she felt completely comfortable in this environment. When she saw Marcus, her smile was bright enough to be visible across the room. "There's my marketing director," Marcus said, his voice carrying pride that made my stomach clench. "Amber's been instrumental in positioning Sterling Real Estate for tonight's opportunities." Instrumental? The woman who'd been systematically destroying my marriage was instrumental to Marcus's professional success. As we approached Amber's group, I noticed several Blackstone executives listening intently to whatever she was discussing. Her laugh was musical, her gestures animated, and she looked exactly like what Marcus apparently wanted in a partner: young, energetic, completely focused on advancing his career. "Marcus," Amber called out when she saw us, her voice carrying just enough volume to ensure that nearby conversations paused. "I was just telling Mr. Davidson about the Marina del Rey environmental impact studies. He's very interested in how we manage the regulatory approvals so efficiently." Environmental impact studies, the research I'd conducted using my materials engineering expertise, now being presented as Amber's contribution to Sterling Real Estate's success. "Diana," Amber continued, turning to me with a smile that looked genuine but felt calculated, "you look absolutely stunning tonight. That dress is perfect for you." Perfect for you. The phrasing suggested that the dress was appropriate for someone my age rather than objectively beautiful. "Thank you," I replied, maintaining the gracious wife persona I'd been perfecting for months. "You look lovely as well. Red is definitely your color." As we moved through the cocktail reception, I watched Marcus and Amber work the room with practiced efficiency. They flanked potential clients and investors, presenting Sterling Real Estate as a dynamic partnership between experienced leadership and innovative thinking. Marcus provided gravitas and business credibility, while Amber offered contemporary insights and youthful energy. They were performing as a team, finishing each other's sentences and building on each other's comments in ways that suggested intimate familiarity with each other's thinking. Anyone watching their interactions would assume they were business partners who'd worked together for years, rather than colleagues who'd met 8 months ago. "The future of luxury development requires understanding contemporary lifestyle preferences," Amber was saying to a group of venture capitalists, her voice carrying the authority of someone discussing her area of expertise. Younger demographics. Amber was positioning herself as essential for reaching markets that were apparently beyond my understanding. "Exactly," Marcus agreed, placing his hand briefly on Amber's back in a gesture that looked professional but felt possessive. "Amber's insights into contemporary consumer behavior have revolutionized how Sterling Real Estate approaches client acquisition." Revolutionized. My husband was crediting his marketing director with revolutionizing his business practices, while his wife stood 3 feet away, ignored and dismissed. As dinner was announced and guests began finding their assigned tables, I realized this was the moment Marcus and Amber had been building toward for months. Tonight, they would celebrate securing the Blackstone partnership that would fund their future together, both personally and professionally. But as I smoothed my emerald silk dress and prepared to take my seat, I knew that Diana Ackles had her own celebration planned. The woman they'd systematically underestimated was about to remind everyone in that ballroom that intelligence, expertise, and strategic thinking weren't exclusive to people under 30. The moment that destroyed everything I'd believed about Marcus's character happened during the dinner's main course, when Blackstone's chairman stood to make the evening's most important announcement. The ballroom fell silent as Robert Blackstone, a man whose real estate empire spanned 3 continents, approached the podium with the gravity of someone about to reshape careers and fortunes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily through the elegant space, "tonight we celebrate not just another successful year, but the launch of Blackstone's most ambitious expansion in company history." Marcus straightened in his chair beside me, his hand finding mine under the table with excitement that felt genuine. For a moment, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with this ambitious man who dreamed of building something extraordinary. Our West Coast expansion will require leadership that embodies Blackstone's vision for the future, Robert continued. Innovation, strategic thinking, and the ability to connect with contemporary markets while maintaining the excellence our clients expect. Contemporary markets. The phrase that had become Marcus's justification for everything he'd done to our marriage. Therefore, it's my pleasure to announce that Sterling Real Estate, under Marcus Sterling's leadership, will head our new Pacific Development Division. The applause was thunderous. Marcus's face lit up with pure triumph as colleagues and competitors acknowledged his achievement. This was the moment he'd been building toward for years, recognition as one of Los Angeles's most visionary developers. But Robert Blackstone wasn't finished. Marcus has demonstrated exceptional leadership capabilities, he continued as the applause died down, and tonight we're also recognizing the innovative marketing strategies that have positioned Sterling Real Estate as a leader in contemporary luxury development. My stomach clenched as I realized what was coming next. I'd like to invite Amber Sinclair to join Marcus at the podium. Her insights into contemporary consumer behavior have revolutionized how we think about marketing to younger demographics. The applause resumed as Amber rose from her table, her red dress catching the chandelier light as she walked toward the stage with confidence that suggested she'd been expecting this recognition. Marcus stood as well, his smile broad with pride for his marketing director's achievement. As they reached the podium together, Robert Blackstone continued his remarks. "What impresses me most about the Sterling Real Estate team," he said, gesturing toward Marcus and Amber, "is how they represent the perfect partnership between experience and innovation. Marcus brings strategic vision and business expertise, while Amber provides contemporary insights and marketing innovation that speaks to modern consumers." Perfect partnership. The phrase hit me like a physical blow as I watched my husband and his marketing director stand together on stage, beaming with shared accomplishment. Their collaboration has produced remarkable results, and frankly, they represent exactly the kind of dynamic leadership team that Blackstone needs for our expansion into new markets. Dynamic leadership team. Marcus and Amber were being publicly recognized as partners whose professional collaboration had impressed Blackstone's most senior executives. "In fact," Robert said, with a smile that suggested he was about to share something particularly significant, "I understand that Marcus and Amber's partnership extends beyond their current professional relationship. They're planning to formalize their business collaboration through a comprehensive strategic partnership that will make Sterling Real Estate even more competitive in contemporary markets." The ballroom erupted in applause, but I heard the words with crystalline clarity. Robert Blackstone had just announced Marcus and Amber's future business partnership to a room full of Los Angeles's most influential real estate professionals. Marcus stepped forward to accept the microphone, his confidence radiating through every gesture. "Thank you, Robert," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom sound system. "This recognition means everything to me and to Sterling Real Estate's future." He paused, looking out over the crowd of colleagues and competitors who were celebrating his achievement. "I want to especially thank Amber Sinclair," Marcus continued, turning toward her with obvious admiration, "whose innovative thinking and contemporary insights have revolutionized how Sterling Real Estate approaches client acquisition and market positioning." The applause continued as Marcus's praise for Amber became increasingly personal. "Working with Amber has reminded me that success requires partnership with people who share your vision for the future," he said, his voice taking on an intimacy that made my cheeks burn with humiliation. "She understands what it takes to build something extraordinary, and she's committed to excellence in ways that inspire everyone around her." Committed to excellence in ways that inspire everyone around her. Marcus was publicly declaring his admiration for Amber's professional qualities while his wife sat 3 tables away listening to her replacement being celebrated. "The future of luxury development belongs to leaders who understand contemporary culture and modern consumer behavior," Marcus continued, his speech becoming a love letter to everything Amber represented. Traditional approaches to real estate marketing simply don't work with today's sophisticated buyers. You need partners who speak the language of innovation and excellence. Partners who speak the language of innovation and excellence. Everything Marcus had once said about our partnership was now being applied to his relationship with Amber. Amber represents the future of business leadership, Marcus concluded, turning toward her with a smile that was visible to everyone in the ballroom. She's brilliant, innovative, and completely dedicated to building something that will redefine industry standards. Brilliant, innovative, completely dedicated. Marcus was publicly describing Amber with the admiration and respect he'd once reserved from me. The applause was deafening as Marcus and Amber returned to their table, but I barely heard it through the ringing in my ears. My husband had just delivered a public love letter to his marketing director, celebrating her intelligence and dedication while his wife sat invisible in the audience. When Marcus returned to our table, his excitement was infectious to everyone except me. "Did you hear that?" he said, his voice carrying the exhilaration of someone whose dreams had just become reality. "Blackstone wants Sterling Real Estate to head their entire West Coast expansion. This is beyond anything I'd imagined." "Congratulations," I managed, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "And Amber's recognition," Marcus continued, apparently oblivious to my emotional state. "Robert specifically mentioned her contributions to our success. She deserves every bit of credit for revolutionizing our marketing approach." She deserves every bit of credit. Marcus was attributing Sterling Real Estate's success to Amber's contributions, while his wife, who'd provided research, funding, and support for 15 years, sat beside him like a forgotten accessory. "Marcus," I said quietly, leaning closer so our conversation wouldn't be overheard, "do you realize what you just did up there?" "What do you mean?" he asked, genuinely confused. "You spent 5 minutes praising Amber's intelligence and dedication in front of 400 people while your wife sat in the audience like a stranger." Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to irritation, the look he got when I questioned something he considered obviously appropriate. "Diana, this is a business event," he said, with the patient tone he'd used to explain professional etiquette to someone who didn't understand it. I was recognizing Amber's professional contributions to Sterling Real Estate's success. It would have been inappropriate not to acknowledge her work. Professional contributions. Marcus genuinely believed that publicly celebrating another woman's brilliance while ignoring his wife was appropriate business behavior. "Besides," he continued, his voice taking on a defensive edge, "you wouldn't want me to give you credit for work you didn't do. Amber earned this recognition through her own expertise and innovation." Work I didn't do? 15 years of supporting Marcus's career, providing research expertise, and sacrificing my own professional advancement had been erased from his memory. As I sat in that elegant ballroom, wearing a designer dress and perfect makeup, watching my husband bask in acclaim for achievements he was attributing to another woman, I realized that Marcus Sterling had successfully convinced himself that his wife's contributions to his success had been minimal. The man who'd once promised to build an empire with me had just publicly celebrated building that empire with someone else. As the applause for Marcus and Amber's recognition finally died down and guests returned to their dinner conversations, I sat in crystalline silence, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. The humiliation was complete, but strangely, it brought clarity rather than devastation. Watching my husband publicly celebrate another woman's brilliance while I remained invisible had burned away the last traces of hope I'd been clinging to about salvaging our marriage. "Diana," Marcus said, turning toward me with the satisfied expression of someone whose dreams had just become reality, "isn't this incredible? Everything we've worked toward is finally happening." "We." Marcus still used language that included me in his success, apparently unaware that he'd just spent 5 minutes publicly attributing that success to someone else. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing my husband's face. The man who'd once valued my intelligence had just demonstrated that he no longer remembered my contributions to his achievements. The partner who'd promised to build something extraordinary with me had just celebrated building it with someone else. Marcus, I said quietly, my voice carrying a calm that surprised even me. I need to step outside for some air. Of course, he replied, already turning back toward the colleagues who were congratulating him on his Blackstone partnership. Don't be long, though. Robert wants to introduce me to some potential investors from the East Coast expansion team. Don't be long. I was expected to return quickly from my emotional breakdown so I could continue playing the supportive wife role at his celebration. I stood and walked toward the ballroom's terrace doors, moving through the crowd with the purposeful stride of someone who had finally made a decision. Several guests nodded politely as I passed, the kind of acknowledgement given to spouses who were present but not particularly important to the evening's business discussions. The terrace overlooked Beverly Hills, city lights twinkling below like scattered diamonds. The December air was cool against my skin, a sharp contrast to the overheated atmosphere of ambition and champagne inside the ballroom. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized but never used. "Alexander," I said when the call connected, "it's Diana. Are you here?" "Just arrived," came the familiar voice of Alexander Black. "My security team is coordinating with hotel management now. Are you ready for this?" "More than ready," I replied, watching through the glass doors as Marcus continued celebrating with colleagues who had no idea his marriage was about to become the least of his concerns. "How do you want to handle the announcement?" "I'll approach your table during the networking portion of the evening," Alexander said. "Robert Blackstone is an old friend, so my presence won't surprise anyone. But when I introduce you as my new chief scientific officer and business partner, that should get their attention." Business partner. Within hours, I would be introduced to Marcus's colleagues as something he'd never allowed me to be in our marriage, an equal partner whose expertise was valued and respected. "There's one more thing," I said, watching Amber laugh at something one of the Blackstone executives had said. "I want you to mention the equity stake. I want everyone in that room to understand exactly what Diana Ackles is worth." Alexander's laugh was appreciative. 40% of Black Industries is currently valued at approximately $800 million. Should I mention that specific figure? $800 million. More than Marcus would earn in his entire lifetime, even with the Blackstone partnership he was currently celebrating.
Mention it, I said. I want there to be no confusion about whether I'm someone's accessory or someone who builds her own empire. After ending the call, I remained on the terrace for several more minutes, preparing mentally for what was about to happen. When I returned to the ballroom, Marcus would still be the ambitious developer who'd just secured the partnership of his dreams. But Diana Ackles would be revealed as something he'd never expected, a woman whose own success dwarfed everything he'd achieved. I thought about the conversation I'd overheard months earlier, when Marcus and Amber had discussed my minimal contributions to his success and planned my replacement with someone who better understood contemporary business culture. They were about to learn that the woman they'd dismissed as irrelevant had been building something extraordinary while they'd been planning her disposal. When I walked back into the ballroom, Marcus looked up from his conversation with concerned attention. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice carrying the solicitude of a husband who cared about his wife's emotional well-being. "I'm perfect," I said, settling back into my chair with a composure that felt unshakable. Just needed a moment to appreciate how beautiful the evening is. Marcus smiled, apparently relieved that I wasn't going to create an emotional scene during his moment of triumph. "The Blackstone partnership is going to change everything for us," he said, reaching for my hand across the table. "We'll finally have the resources to build the life we've always dreamed about." Always dreamed about. Marcus still believed we were building a shared future, unaware that his dreams were about to collide with Diana Ackles' reality. As I squeezed his hand and smiled, I felt something that might have been pity for the man who had no idea what was about to happen to his carefully constructed world. 20 minutes later, as the dinner plates were being cleared and guests began moving toward the networking area with coffee and dessert, I saw Alexander Black enter the ballroom. Even across the crowded space, his presence was unmistakable, tall, silver-haired, wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly salary.
Conversations paused as people recognized one of California's most successful entrepreneurs, someone whose business empire spanned biotechnology, real estate, and venture capital. Marcus noticed the shift in atmosphere immediately. "Is that Alexander Black?" he asked, craning his neck to get a better view. "What's he doing here? I didn't think Blackstone worked with Black Industries." "Maybe he's expanding into real estate development," I suggested innocently, watching Alexander move through the crowd with the confidence of someone who belonged in any room he entered. "If Alexander Black is here, it means something big is happening," Marcus said, his voice carrying the reverence he reserved for truly successful people. "His biotech division alone is worth more than most companies' entire valuation." Biotech division. Marcus had no idea that his dismissed wife was about to become Alexander's partner in that very division. I excused myself to visit the ladies' room, timing my return to coincide with Alexander's approach to our table. As I walked back across the ballroom, I saw him speaking with Robert Blackstone near the bar, their conversation animated and clearly friendly. "Marcus Sterling," Alexander said, approaching our table with the easy authority of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "I've heard impressive things about your work with Blackstone." Marcus stood immediately, extending his hand with the enthusiasm of someone meeting a business legend. "Mr. Black, it's an honor. I followed Black Industries' expansion for years. Your approach to sustainable development has revolutionized the industry." "Thank you," Alexander replied, his attention shifting to me with a smile that suggested we were already acquainted. "And you must be Diana." "Diana Ackles," I said, standing to shake his hand while Marcus looked confused by Alexander's familiarity with his wife's name. "Actually," Alexander said, his voice carrying clearly enough for nearby tables to hear, "I've been trying to convince your wife to join Black Industries for the past 6 months. Her reputation in cellular regeneration research is extraordinary." Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching alarm. "I'm sorry, what?" "Dr. Diana Ackles," Alexander continued, using my professional title with the respect Marcus had abandoned years ago. "Her work on anti-aging therapies at Morrison Biotech was groundbreaking. The pharmaceutical industry has been trying to recruit her for years." Dr. Diana Ackles. Hearing my professional identity spoken aloud in front of Marcus felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd forgotten existent. "I don't understand," Marcus said, looking between Alexander and me like we were speaking a foreign language. "Diana does consulting work from home. She's not involved in major pharmaceutical research." Alexander's laugh was genuinely surprised. "Marcus, your wife published 15 papers on cellular regeneration that have been cited over 3,000 times in scientific literature. Her longevity research has influenced every major biotech company's development strategy." The color drained from Marcus's face as he realized that Alexander Black knew more about his wife's professional achievements than he did. "In fact," Alexander continued, apparently enjoying Marcus's discomfort, "I'm here tonight specifically to make an announcement about Diana's new position with Black Industries." New position? Marcus looked at me with an expression that mixed confusion, betrayal, and dawning understanding that something significant was happening without his knowledge or permission. "Diana has agreed to become Chief Scientific Officer of Black Industries," Alexander announced, his voice carrying to the surrounding tables where conversations were pausing as people strained to listen. "She'll be leading our anti-aging research initiative with a budget of $200 million and complete autonomy over laboratory operations." Chief Scientific Officer, complete autonomy, $200 million budget. Each phrase hit Marcus like a physical blow as he realized his dismissed wife was being offered opportunities that dwarfed his Blackstone partnership. "Additionally," Alexander continued with perfect timing, "Diana will hold a 40% equity stake in Black Industries, making her one of the largest individual shareholders in any major biotechnology company." 40% equity stake? The number represented more money than Marcus would earn in multiple lifetimes, even with his new Blackstone position. Marcus stared at me like I was a stranger. "Diana, what is he talking about?" I'm talking about your wife being one of the most brilliant scientists of her generation, Alexander said before I could respond. Marcus, I'm surprised you're not more familiar with Diana's professional reputation. She's been featured in Scientific American, Nature, and the Journal of Molecular Biology. Her research has attracted attention from Harvard, Stanford, and the National Institutes of Health. Professional reputation? Marcus was learning that his wife had achieved recognition in the scientific community that he'd never bothered to understand or appreciate. When did this happen? Marcus asked me, his voice carrying confusion and something that might have been anger. I've been in discussions with Mr. Black for several months, I said calmly, maintaining the composure I'd been practicing for this exact moment. The partnership became official this afternoon. Several months? Marcus realized that while he'd been planning my replacement, I'd been building my own empire with someone whose success made his achievements look modest by comparison. Diana, Alexander said, turning toward me with obvious respect, shall we make the formal announcement to the room? I think people would be interested to hear about Black Industries' new chief scientific officer. As Alexander guided me toward the front of the ballroom, I looked back at Marcus, who remained frozen at our table, apparently unable to process that his dismissed wife was about to be introduced to his colleagues as someone more successful than he'd ever imagined. The woman he'd called too old and irrelevant was about to become the most important person in the room. Alexander's announcement to the Blackstone Gala was delivered with the understated confidence of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. As we reached the front of the ballroom, conversations gradually ceased as people recognized that something significant was about to be revealed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander said, his voice carrying easily through the elegant space, "I apologize for interrupting your evening, but I have an announcement that I believe will interest everyone here." The ballroom fell silent with the anticipation that accompanied major business revelations. These were people accustomed to announcements that could reshape industries and fortunes. Black Industries has just completed the acquisition of the most brilliant scientific mind in biotechnology research, Alexander continued, his hand resting respectfully on my back. Dr. Diana Ackles has agreed to join our company as Chief Scientific Officer, leading our anti-aging research division with complete autonomy and unlimited resources.
The applause began immediately, but Alexander raised his hand to indicate he wasn't finished. "Some of you may not be familiar with Dr. Ackles' achievements," he said, turning toward me with obvious respect, "but her research on cellular regeneration has been cited over 3,000 times in scientific literature. Her work at Morrison Biotech resulted in the first viable anti-aging therapy to reach human trials." Human trials? Alexander was revealing accomplishments that Marcus had dismissed as playing with test tubes. "Dr. Ackles holds 14 patents related to longevity research," Alexander continued, "and her methodologies have influenced every major pharmaceutical company's development strategy. Harvard, Stanford, and the National Institutes of Health have been competing for her expertise for the past 5 years. I looked across the ballroom and found Marcus at our table, his face pale with shock as he learned about achievements he'd never bothered to understand. Beside him, Amber looked equally stunned, apparently realizing that the woman she'd helped to dismiss was internationally recognized for expertise neither she nor Marcus possessed. "Additionally," Alexander said, his voice taking on the tone he used for particularly significant announcements, "Dr. Ackles will hold a 40% equity stake in Black Industries, representing an investment of approximately $800 million. $800 million. The number rippled through the ballroom like an earthquake as Los Angeles's business elite absorbed the fact that Diana Ackles was now worth more than most of their company's entire valuations. The applause was thunderous, but I barely heard it through the rushing in my ears. After years of being dismissed as too old and irrelevant, I was being celebrated by the same business community that had ignored me when I was introduced as Marcus's wife.
Dr. Ackles, Robert Blackstone said, approaching us with the deference he reserved for the evening's most important guests, I had no idea we had such distinguished scientific talent in our midst. Your research has implications far beyond biotechnology. The real estate industry could be revolutionized by longevity breakthroughs. Scientific talent? The same man who'd watched Marcus dismiss my expertise hours earlier was now acknowledging my professional stature. I'd be happy to discuss the commercial applications, I replied, feeling confidence I hadn't experienced in years. Cellular regeneration research has implications for everything from healthcare costs to housing market dynamics. As business leaders approached to congratulate me and discuss potential collaborations, I watched Marcus remain frozen at our table, apparently unable to process that his dismissed wife was now the most sought-after person in the room. Patricia Whitmore, the Blackstone executive who'd characterized my scientific interests as charming hobbies, now approached with obvious eagerness to discuss biotech investments. The same people who'd politely tolerated my presence as Marcus's wife were now treating me as someone whose expertise could advance their own business interests. Dr. Ackles, said Dr. Patricia Morse, the venture capitalist who'd been interrupted when Marcus dismissed my biotechnology insights, I'd very much like to schedule a meeting to discuss potential investment opportunities. Your research could complement several companies in our portfolio. Investment opportunities. My expertise was suddenly valuable for advancing other people's business strategies rather than irrelevant academic posturing. The transformation was complete within 30 minutes. Diana Ackles had been revealed as someone whose success dwarfed everyone else's achievements, including the husband who'd spent years convincing her she was professionally irrelevant. When I finally returned to our table, Marcus looked at me like I was a stranger wearing his wife's face. "Diana," he said quietly, his voice carrying confusion and something that might have been fear, "when were you planning to tell me about this partnership?" "I wasn't," I replied calmly, settling into my chair with composure that felt unshakable. "Just like you weren't planning to tell me about your divorce plans." The color drained from Marcus's face as he realized I knew about his conversation with Amber. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Long enough to make my own plans," I said, meeting his eyes with the directness he'd been avoiding for months. "The woman you called too old and irrelevant just became one of the most powerful people in biotechnology. I'd say that timing worked out perfectly." Marcus stared at me for a long moment, apparently absorbing the full implications of what had just happened. His dismissed wife had achieved success that made his Blackstone partnership look modest by comparison. The woman he'd planned to replace with Amber had revealed herself to be more valuable than he'd ever imagined. "Diana," he said finally, "we need to talk." "No, Marcus," I replied, standing and smoothing my emerald green dress. "We really don't. I think everything that needed to be said was said perfectly clearly tonight." As I walked away from our table toward Alexander, who was waiting near the ballroom's exit, I heard Marcus call my name one final time. But Diana Ackles had moved beyond the reach of men who measured women's worth by their usefulness to masculine ambitions. The woman he'd called too old had just proven that intelligence, expertise, and strategic thinking weren't exclusive to people under 30, and she was just getting started. 6 months later, I stood in the executive boardroom of Black Industries' new Beverly Hills headquarters, looking out at the city skyline where Marcus's real estate developments dotted the landscape like monuments to ambitions that had once seemed so important. The irony wasn't lost on me. From my office windows, I could see 3 sterling real estate projects that I'd helped fund and plan during the years when I'd believed we were building something together. The divorce had been finalized the previous month with terms that reflected California's community property laws rather than Marcus's strategic planning. Despite his attempts to minimize my contributions to his success, the court had awarded me half of Sterling Real Estate's assets plus the Pacific Heights house we'd renovated together. But those settlements felt insignificant compared to what I'd built independently. Black Industries' anti-aging research division had become the most valuable biotechnology company on the West Coast within 4 months of my joining. Our cellular regeneration therapy had advanced to phase 3 human trials with preliminary results that exceeded even my most optimistic projections. The treatment could extend healthy human lifespan by 40 to 60 years while maintaining cognitive function and physical vitality. Dr. Ackles, my research director said, entering the boardroom with quarterly reports that would be released to investors later that afternoon, the latest trial data came back from Johns Hopkins. The cellular regeneration markers are showing sustained improvement across all age demographics. Sustained improvement across all age demographics. The research that Marcus had dismissed as playing with test tubes was on track to revolutionize human health within the next decade. My phone buzzed with a text message from Alexander, who was attending a biotechnology conference in Switzerland where our research was being presented to international pharmaceutical companies. Diana, just fielded acquisition offers from 3 European companies. Latest bid is $4.2 billion for your research division alone. Should I tell them you're not interested? $4.2 billion for work that Marcus had characterized as a hobby that distracted from real business considerations. I typed back quickly, "Tell them Dr. Ackles isn't for sale at any price." The transformation in my personal life had been equally dramatic. Moving out of the Century City apartment I'd shared with Marcus felt like emerging from a carefully constructed prison. My new home in Manhattan Beach was smaller but entirely mine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific Ocean, a home laboratory where I could conduct preliminary research, and space designed around my preferences rather than compromises with someone else's vision. The woman who'd once measured her worth by her usefulness to Marcus's ambitions now made decisions based entirely on her own priorities and values. Saturday mornings were spent reviewing research proposals rather than attending client brunches where I was expected to charm investors who didn't respect my expertise. Evening hours were devoted to scientific conferences and innovation symposiums rather than networking events where I was introduced as someone's supportive spouse. "Dr. Ackles," my assistant announced through the intercom, "you have a call from the MacArthur Foundation. They'd like to schedule an interview for this year's fellowship consideration." MacArthur Fellowship, the genius grant that had been offered to me 5 years earlier when I'd been too busy supporting Marcus's career to pursue opportunities that might have conflicted with his networking schedule. "Schedule it for next week," I replied, feeling the satisfaction that came from being recognized for achievements that belonged entirely to me. The personal relationships in my new life were built on mutual respect rather than utility. Alexander had become not just a business partner, but someone whose intellectual curiosity matched my own. Our conversations ranged from cellular biology to venture capital strategy, with each of us contributing expertise that the other valued and appreciated. "You know what I find most remarkable about your research?" Alexander had said during dinner the previous evening. "It's not just that you've solved the biological puzzle of aging, it's that you've done it while building a business model that will make the treatment accessible rather than exclusive to wealthy clients." Accessible rather than exclusive. Alexander understood that my scientific goals extended beyond profit maximization to genuine improvement of human health outcomes. The contrast with Marcus's approach to business was stark. Where Marcus had measured success by exclusivity and status, I'd designed research protocols that prioritized broad application and social benefit. The anti-aging therapy would be priced affordably and distributed globally, rather than marketed as a luxury service for elite clients. My phone rang with a call I'd been expecting but hadn't looked forward to. "Diana," came Marcus's voice, carrying a vulnerability I hadn't heard since our early dating years. "I saw the Wall Street Journal article about your MacArthur nomination. Congratulations." "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone professionally cordial. "I also saw that Black Industries is being valued at $12 billion. Diana, I had no idea about your research achievements. If I'd understood—" "Marcus," I interrupted gently, "you had 15 years to understand. You chose not to." There was a long pause before he continued. I know I don't deserve to ask this, but I need you to know that losing you was the biggest mistake of my life. Not because of your success, but because I forgot who you were as a person. The apology felt genuine, but came too late to matter. I hope you find happiness, I said, meaning it sincerely, but my life has moved beyond the need for your validation or regret. After ending the call, I returned to the research proposals spread across my desk. Tomorrow's schedule included meetings with Stanford's medical school about expanding our clinical trials, a conference call with European pharmaceutical regulators, and dinner with Alexander to discuss our next acquisition target. Diana Ackles had built an empire that dwarfed anything Marcus Sterling had achieved. But more importantly, she'd reclaimed the intellectual curiosity and professional confidence that had been systematically diminished during her marriage. The woman who'd once been dismissed as too old to understand contemporary business culture was now shaping the future of human longevity. And she was just getting started on the next phase of revolutionary research that would redefine what it meant to age gracefully. Standing at my office window, watching the sunset over Los Angeles, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete satisfaction with the life I'd built entirely on my own terms.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.